A spacecraft hits Earth at 89 miles per hour. Inside, a cosmonaut burns alive on impact.
This is not an accident. Vladimir Komarov knew he would die.
Engineers told him directly. The spacecraft had 203 documented structural problems.
The parachute system failed in tests. The heat shield showed cracks. The fuel cells leaked. Every simulation ended in catastrophe. Komarov boarded Soyuz 1 anyway on April 23, 1967. Why? Because his backup pilot was Yuri Gagarin, the first human in space. A Soviet hero. The Kremlin would never risk Gagarin's life. So Komarov made a choice. He would fly the death trap himself. The mission was supposed to last one day. Soyuz 1 would dock with Soyuz 2 in orbit. A propaganda victory for the 50th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. Leonid Brezhnev himself demanded the launch proceed. No delays. No cancellations. The space race against America required spectacle. But what nobody outside the USSR knew was this: Soviet engineers were screaming into the void. Their reports went ignored. Their warnings were buried. Political officers overruled safety protocols. Komarov wrote a letter before launch. He demanded an open casket funeral. He wanted the Kremlin leadership to see what their decisions had done to him. What they found after impact made that impossible. 10 days before launch, Yuri Gagarin filed a 10-page memo. He listed every flaw in Soyuz 1. He called the spacecraft unfit for human flight. He sent it directly to Leonid Brezhnev. The memo vanished into bureaucracy. No response ever came. Vladimir Komarov was 40 years old. An Air Force colonel. A veteran of the Voskhod 1 mission in 1964. He had a wife, Valentina, and 2 children. He was an engineer himself. He understood exactly what the numbers meant. His survival probability, near zero. The night before launch, Komarov and Gagarin drank together at the cosmonaut dormitory in BAIKONUR. Fellow cosmonaut Alexei Leonov was there. He later testified that Komarov said, "I'm not going to make it back from this flight. But I can't refuse. They'll send Yuri instead. And I can't let that happen." Gagarin tried everything. He showed up at the launch pad suited up, claiming he was ready to replace Komarov. Officials physically removed him. The political stakes were too high. The Americans were planning Apollo missions. The Soviets needed a win. A dual Soyuz docking would dominate headlines worldwide. At 3:35 a.m. Moscow time on April 23, Soyuz 1 launched from Site 1 at BAIKONUR. The rocket performed flawlessly. Komarov reached orbit 10 minutes later. For a brief moment, success seemed possible. Then the left solar panel failed to deploy. The spacecraft lost 50% of its electrical power. Komarov manually oriented the capsule using thrusters to keep the right panel toward the sun. But the thrusters misfired. The spacecraft began spinning. Slowly at first. Then faster. Ground control canceled Soyuz 2's launch immediately. The docking mission was aborted. Now the only goal was bringing Komarov home alive. The odds were dropping by the minute. But here's what nobody at mission control knew yet: the parachute system had already been compromised on the ground. Komarov circled Earth 18 times. Each orbit, the situation worsened. The spacecraft spun uncontrollably. The attitude control system completely failed by orbit 5. Komarov couldn't stabilize for re-entry. He manually fired thrusters in short bursts, burning precious fuel. Transcripts released in 1997 reveal the conversations. "Ground control, how are you feeling, Vladimir?" "Komarov, everything is in order." His voice was calm. Steady. He knew he was lying. So did they. By orbit 13, mission controllers activated a direct line to Alexei Kosygin. The Soviet premier himself spoke to Komarov from the Kremlin. Kosygin asked if he had any requests. Komarov asked him to take care of his family. Valentina was listening on a separate line. She heard her husband say goodbye. Yuri Gagarin was in the control room. He demanded to speak. Controllers patched him through. The 2 cosmonauts talked for 6 minutes. The audio remains classified. Witnesses said both men were crying. At orbit 18, Komarov aligned the spacecraft manually. He had one chance. Re-entry would begin over Africa. The heat shield would slow Soyuz 1 from 17,500 miles per hour. If the capsule survived the plasma field, parachutes would deploy at 23,000 feet. If they worked. Komarov fired the retro rockets at 6:55 a.m. Moscow time on April 24. The spacecraft dropped from orbit. The heat shield held. Plasma engulfed the capsule, cutting off radio communication for 4 minutes. Controllers waited. Nothing. Then static. Then Komarov's voice, "I'm through the worst." Beginning parachute sequence. At 23,000 feet, explosive bolts fired. The drogue parachute deployed. It stabilized the tumbling descent. Success. The main parachute container opened. The cables extended. Then nothing. The main chute never inflated. It tangled in the drogue lines. The backup system activated automatically. The reserve parachute deployed. It immediately tangled with the main chute. Both became a useless knot of fabric. Soyuz 1 was falling at terminal velocity. Komarov had 90 seconds. Radio recordings captured his final transmission. He was screaming. Cursing the engineers. Cursing the designers. Cursing the officials who sent him to die. The words were so profane, Soviet censors classified the audio for 30 years. But what caused the parachute failure is even more disturbing than the crash itself. Soyuz 1 impacted near Orenburg at 6:24 a.m. The descent module hit the step at 89 miles per hour. The impact crushed the capsule. Then the remaining fuel ignited. The wreckage burned for 45 minutes before rescue teams arrived. Temperatures inside exceeded 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Search crews found a crater 10 feet deep. The spacecraft was unrecognizable. Komarov's body had been incinerated. Only bone fragments remained. Forensic teams identified him from a single heel bone. That was all that survived intact. The Kremlin held the open casket funeral Komarov requested. But the casket was closed. His remains were too damaged. The official story, tragic accident during experimental flight. The 203 documented failures were never mentioned. The engineers' warnings were erased from records. Here is what the investigation revealed: the parachute failure was mechanical, not electronic. The main chute container had a pressure equalization vent. During ascent, this vent allowed air to escape so atmospheric pressure differences wouldn't rupture the container. But the vent was too small. It created a partial vacuum during descent. When the explosive bolts fired, the vacuum seal prevented the spring-loaded mechanism from ejecting the parachute fully. The fabric caught on the container edge and tangled. Engineers had identified this exact flaw 8 months before launch. They built a new container design. It was ready. But implementing it would delay the mission by 6 weeks. The Kremlin refused. The vent design stayed. Komarov flew with a parachute that couldn't deploy properly. The backup parachute used an identical system. When it deployed, it failed for the same reason. Both chutes tangled because the containers couldn't eject them cleanly. Komarov had zero chance of survival from the moment those containers were installed. Yuri Gagarin attended the closed funeral. Witnesses said he stood motionless for 40 minutes, staring at the casket. He told colleagues, "They killed him. And they'll kill more of us." 7 years later, Gagarin died in a jet crash. Conspiracy theories claim assassination. The official report blames pilot error. The truth remains disputed. But the most shocking revelation came from American intelligence. CIA tracking stations monitored Soyuz 1's entire flight. They recorded Komarov's final transmissions. Analysts translated the screaming, the profanity, the terror. The audio was shared with NASA to demonstrate Soviet recklessness. It became a classified warning: this is what happens when politics overrule engineering. The recording influenced Apollo safety protocols directly. Some historians argue Komarov's death saved American astronauts by forcing NASA to slow down and prioritize crew survival over speed. Vladimir Komarov's ashes are buried in the Kremlin Wall necropolis. He's honored as a hero of the Soviet Union. His family received a state pension. But for decades, the true story stayed hidden. Valentina Komarova died in 1995, never knowing the full details of her husband's final moments. The classified audio was released only in 2007. The Soviet space program reformed after Soyuz 1. Engineers gained veto power over political deadlines. The next Soyuz mission didn't fly until October 1968, 18 months later. Extensive redesigns addressed the 203 failures Gagarin documented.
Every subsequent Soyuz capsule carried dual independent parachute systems with separate deployment mechanisms.
The vent issue was eliminated entirely. But Komarov's sacrifice echoes beyond engineering. NASA analyzed the Soyuz 1 disaster intensely. It reinforced their decision to delay Apollo 1's launch schedule despite political pressure.
Ironically, Apollo 1 burned on the launch pad 3 months before Soyuz 1, killing 3 astronauts.
Both disasters taught the same lesson: speed kills. Today, Soyuz spacecraft are the most reliable human-rated vehicles in history. Over 140 crewed missions since 1967. Only 2 fatal accidents, Soyuz 1 and Soyuz 11 in 1971. That safety record exists because Komarov's death forced transparency over propaganda. His final screaming transmission has never been officially released by Russia. American copies remain classified. But transcripts exist. Komarov didn't curse his fate.
He cursed the men who ignored the engineers, who prioritized spectacle over survival,
who sent him to die for a headline. One question still haunts investigators: if Komarov knew he'd die, why didn't he refuse the mission outright and expose the flaws publicly?
The answer reveals how deep the Soviet system's control reached.
And what happens when silence becomes complicity? Send this to someone who needs to hear it. Then subscribe for a new dark truth every day.